Okay, hi, I'm Christian Jonjuk. I'm an animation director for Ubisoft, and this was actually my first job at Ubisoft. So at the time, I was just a senior animator, and then I got promoted to lead combat animator. But I wanted to give, oh, has it gone? There you go. I wanted to kind of give, it's like 10 years since Assassin's Creed kind of came out, and I thought it was about time that someone talked about the animation, and because I worked on the combat system, I thought I'd just focus on that. So I'll give you a quick kind of overview, I suppose, of what I'm going to be talking about. I'm going to throw in a little introduction, which I've probably just done, and then I'll talk about the direction of the combat, how we created the combat, and then I really want to show some depth of the combat, things that have been in there for 10 years that people maybe didn't know and then kind of got stripped out and then was a real shame because it was kind of awesome. So I first want to give some perspective. In a short time, Assassin's Creed became one of the most recognizable open world franchises in video games. And it's known for like its amazing locations, its rich history of Assassin's Creed lore and everything, but there have been all these talks about how the teams crafted the worlds, but no one has really talked about the origins of the actual systems. And since it was the first one, it was kind of the foundation, I thought it'd be kind of cool. So AC1 laid the foundations and the pillars for what was to come. And 2007 was a great year for video games. It was a new console cycle, and it was in its infancy, and I suppose it's now kind of completely passed us by. The first-person shooter was starting its world domination with Halo, with Call of Duty, with TF2 and Portal and Bioshock. Then Guitar Hero and Rock Band were making people feel like rock stars in their living room. Defended an entire galaxy with Mass Effect, and also Nathan Drake was kind of running around being pretty badass in Uncharted. So Assassin's Creed was released in November of that year, and would kind of try and set a standard for character realism and interaction. We were trying to push I think the mandate originally was to redefine the action-adventure genre. So, that was when I joined Ubisoft. Well, I joined Ubisoft Montreal before that. But the team in Montreal, as I said, wanted to try and redefine this. But we wanted to fundamentally change how gamers would view character motion and interaction in video games, sorry. And AC was one of those games that really kind of epitomized what next gen was really going to be. So, as the lead combat animator on AC1, I'm still extremely proud of the work that we did. I was like really lucky, and it's extremely rare to have had an experience in a game like this. It isn't often shared with people outside of the team, and as I said, I don't think anyone's ever really talked about the animation of Assassin's Creed. Being on that team was kind of like equal parts, right place, right time. So I kind of saw my opportunity, and I just kind of grabbed it. So I wanted to look back at this small part of AC1, the combat system, that I was responsible for, 10 years later, and kind of share some of the insight and the depth, and maybe show you some things that you didn't know existed. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the direction. So something that always stuck with me was the original Prince of Persia on the Amiga 500. I was obsessed with it, and it was like my mum and dad at the time wouldn't allow me to have a console. They were like, okay, you can have an Amiga and then that's it. So I kind of played all these games that had amazing animation. I just used to kind of like look at them and like just go, okay, this is pretty cool. But it was also kind of one of the factors of my decision to move to UB Montreal, basically because they just released like Sands of Time. I was heavily influenced by games with like beautiful fluid animation. They just fascinated me. I love moments as like the long drawn out skid in Prince of Persia, the feel of a jump and a hang in, like there was a game called Flashback by I think Delphine Software, I think it was at the time, or the feel of like a roundhouse in like IK+. I loved it. It was something that, it was those moments that I really kind of connected to. And there was something about the slower pace of these games that appealed to me. They felt like I would have to think and plan ahead more, and I wanted to work on more games like this. So it was kind of natural that I focused my attention on like UB Montreal, as they were the ones that seemed to be pushing animation in games, and the fact that Prince of Persia Sands of Time had just been made. It was one of the real kind of deciding factors to move there. There you go, yeah. So my first day in the studio, I was sat at my PC and I was basically told to watch 2 videos that would kind of show the concept of what the team were trying to achieve. So they'd kind of been in this really early pre-production. So the first one kind of showed the assassin climbing up the side of a building, taking out like guards on a roof, jumping down, fighting a little, and then kind of making his escape through a crowded market, like jumping on a horse and like off into the desert. This was like a fake game footage that we used to do, and it would kind of give you an example of what like we were trying to achieve at the time. I remember seeing this and thinking, "There's no way we can possibly do that." It's kind of remarkable how close the final, well, actually, how the game kind of pushed this look even further. And like the second video kind of showed the assassin walking through like a crowded market. It was nice and slow. It was a bit quieter. And he was like silently assassinating someone with like, there was a lot less going on, but it didn't mean anything until the very end of the video, where both assassins kind of came together, and then they ended up on the back of the same horse, and they were like, okay, well this is, so it's basically, it looked like it was supposed to be like a 2-player game. It wasn't, but it was like, but one of the intentions was, they were going to kind of work together. It looked exciting, it looked fluid, it looked fresh, and I'd never seen anything like it before. But I was told that I'd be responsible for everything fight related, and basically nothing had been done except for like a design document. So we wanted the fighting to be intelligent and dangerous, but reward calmer players that recognized the situation and made good choices. Like to try and make the combat feel more rhythmic with like a slower pace, and I really wanted to make sure they didn't feel like button mashing. You know, so we really wanted the rhythm to kind of feel there, and then you start hitting certain areas, and it would start to feel really good. So but the origins of the original combat system were more about distance management, so it was kind of like fencing. The moves were considered and had more of a precise feel. It was pretty brutal, and the moves were like quick and sharp, but you couldn't really read it. It was like, it just didn't feel right, and it just felt like there was something that just didn't fit in that world. But fencing wasn't really about fighting multiple opponents. So I remember we used this Ridley Scott film, The Duelist, as kind of reference for that time. And the early tests, although they supported what the design was going to be, and they looked pretty good, it just didn't feel fun. So we looked at another Ridley Scott film, Kingdom of Heaven, and this was being used widely with the team as kind of reference for a bunch of other stuff. So why we didn't look at this for combat in the first place, I have no idea, but it's like we kind of came back to it, and then we felt like it made so much more sense to look at this as reference. You know, because of the time period and the combat, and again, it was still intelligent and dangerous, but it just kind of felt a little bit more fast-paced, and I think the main thing was it felt raw. You know, it was like, it always felt like there was some desperation. And it was also, it was much more, oh, was it stopped? I'll go back and I'll do it again. And it was also much more readable due to the weight of the weapons. There was something about the clash of the steel and how desperate that need of survival was, and I remember like really liking that too. So, okay. So it was important to understand that the assassin would or wouldn't do in certain situations. We kind of had these unwritten rules of like the assassin, like for example, the assassin wouldn't do any unnecessary spinning. There was no kind of jumping in combat, and there'd be like certainly no kind of no backflipping. And it was the main thing is like the assassin was not a ninja, so we keep like AC combat as grounded as possible to keep it kind of different from Pop. And I think that, oh sorry, when I say Pop I mean Prince of Persia. And it's like we wanted to kind of separate them so far away from each other because they were both being made at the time. So we wanted Assassins to feel a lot more realistic, a lot more grounded, a lot more raw, whereas Prince of Persia was more fantastical, and it was like the wall running and all that sort of stuff. And that was kind of the polar opposite of what Assassin's Creed was supposed to be. So, you know, it's like, so now I just want to kind of talk about how we created some of the stuff. So we started off with kind of our like fight team. So the teams are set up in a way that is kind of commonplace now, but in 2005 seemed almost alien. Alex Dewan, the animation director, liked animators to sit with his programmers and designers rather than just other animators. so this kind of so even this kind of showed up in like the layout of the team. So I think we had let's see, so we had 2 animators. And they were kind of sat. They were never really sat next to each other. They were kind of sat separate. And then we had 3 towards the end. Then we had 2 gameplay programmers. We had 1 producer that made sure that we had everything we needed when we kind of needed it, and would protect us a little, allowing us to go a little rogue, I suppose, sometimes if we needed to be. Then we had a designer, and this was kind of my first taste of what I used to call like the trinity of animation design and gameplay programming. So it's like we'd always, like the animators and the programmers and the designers would always understand a little bit of what each of the other disciplines were doing, and it would always kind of help each other. You know, like, so animators would understand what design were doing, and they wouldn't know how to code, but they kind of understand how a system got put together. And then we had our main designer, and he used to sit at his desk, and he used to kind of play the game and like not look at the screen, and he just like literally have the controller not plugged in, and he just trying to feel what the buttons look like. Kind of feel what the combat felt like with just button presses. So we try and get the rhythm of everything. Then we had 1 AI programmer, and this was also for kind of like enemies outside of combat. So he took on quite a lot, and it was like we had to. It's like we didn't really know what to do with AI at the beginning. It was kind of the system was kind of being made organically. So it's like once we started having ideas, that was when the AI guys came in a little bit more. But I'll talk about that later. We had like 1 tester, and then we had like a programmer that would help with integration with the rest of the game, make sure that that system worked with everything else, and we didn't blow anything up and just kind of make like an awesome combat system but a rubbish game. And then we actually had 1 audio guy. And then there you go, there's a little table in the middle. And that was where we had our meetings. But we'd have everyone kind of sat in this little, like, I suppose, cabal sort of thing. And then at the time, this was the first time that in UB Montreal that they'd done this. And this kind of like way of working went through all the teams after that. But it was really useful because it kind of meant that you had everyone you needed to make a decision basically within about 3 foot of you. So the original combat system, well, after the kind of the fencing thing, we kind of worked out that didn't work. So Alex has said, well, okay, we need to show something at E3. So what we did is we used the original Prince of Persia combat system as a base. So we just replaced the animations with a kind of basically a more grounded feel, so everything was a little bit slower and a little bit more considered. It's not looping. This allowed animators to kind of be much more creative and create like interesting attacks. Like moves would be readable and work in any kind of direction. We wanted we wanted things to be telegraphed as well. But we wanted that telegraphing to come from the animation itself. We didn't want to have any kind of UI like above the characters. We wanted you to be able to read the animation enough that you could actually work with it. But that was kind of what Patrice wanted, and it was something that we just kind of we took on board as a challenge. Like we'd have like lock on, which would allow for like multi attacks and everything. So let's see. So I apologize there. So as you can see here, this would be kind of like a medium attack distance, kind of going with like I think it was an attack right, but you'd hit in this kind of up left position, as you'd already locked on the NPC in front of you. So then this would be kind of followed by a short combo depending on how close you were, and if you made contact. Then these could be chained with like further directional attacks for any kind of distance, depending on like the previous hit, allowed for like different combos depending on the hit before. So you could kind of start to build things out from these things, and it wasn't a complicated system. It was something that gave the animators a lot more freedom to go and animate. So this simple foundation would kind of allow us to attack anyone, anywhere, in any kind of vicinity. But it would also kind of allow us to add variety. And as soon as we could do this, then the animators got a lot more interested in what we could do, because like just the distance management with the fencing just wasn't something that was fun to animate. So once we had the foundation of the combat, we started working on the block. Now this particular moment in the original Prince of Persia had a huge kind of influence on me. and it was just, I used to love the whole idea of the parry and the attack and the block and everything. So it was like, it was one of these things that I wanted to take across to Assassin's Creed, and because it was Prince of Persia, it kind of seemed to fit as well. But you know, the cool thing about this was, if your timing was right, you could have this really nice kind of fluid like motion, and then it's like with that smooth motion, you really feel like you reacted to what was happening. So that whole counter was something that I really wanted to take across. So we had this thing called, let's just bring up this. So we had this thing called the donut, and the donut is something that I coined as an idea, and I like the idea of hits were readable if they came in from diagonals. So we didn't have any hits that came directly down or across or even forward. Everything had to be on this nice readable thing. And it's like, we wanted it to feel kind of like visceral, and we wanted to feel like there was two swords connecting. And you know, that way everything would kind of feel real, and nothing, there's been a couple of games that had tried to do it, but nothing that had really given us the idea of what we wanted to do. And so what would happen is we were effectively going to kind of auto block. So instead of, because we wanted like this one hit kill idea, which kind of went through until very late on in the game. But then if you didn't react to being hit, you kind of did this automatic like desperate block. So creating the donut would give us this whole way of connecting swords. There was kind of a whole thing where we would just go onto other PCs and like try and I forgot what it was. It was something to do with like we'd basically make sure that people, I can't remember. It's something about like making people buy donuts. But anyway, irrelevant. So creating the donut with so these are plaques. These attacks would always be kind of on diagonals, and so it was a lot better for readability. And the AI would kind of use these block breakers, so they could like stop you from attacking, or they could like really change the way you were going to play, which I'll talk about in a bit. So yeah, and then we had this kind of this here was how one of the Max files would look. Yeah, so we used 3ds Max. I haven't said that yet, but so all of Assassin's Creed was done on 3ds Max. We'd worked with Biped, and this rig kind of stuck through a lot of the other AC games. It worked. We had all the tools that kind of would go with it. So this here was how a block file would look, and it would block in each one of the diagonals, and it would be foot left and foot right. So then what would happen is, as it would go to a block kind of animation, it would blend over the course of, I think, like 3 or 4 frames, and then over that, so that would be the starting position, and then it would like ping, and then it would go flying off. But the cool thing about this is it would start to allow us for like finishes and grabs and counters. So the counters I wanted to talk about a little bit, because they kind of came from a moment that we'd seen in this trailer. Now, when I originally first saw this trailer, we saw it as kind of a grey block, because they were going to talk about it at E3. And they had this moment where the assassin would just kind of, let's see if it's there. Yeah, so we had this, let me go back, sorry. So we had this moment where the assassin would just dodge out the way of the sword there. And I love that moment so much, but there was nothing like that in the game. So what I did is I ended up taking one of the programmers to one side, and I was like, okay, I really want to animate this moment, but I don't know what to do. And he's like, well, you animate it, we'll put it in. And this was before we had all sorts of crazy state machines and tools and the way we could put stuff in. So I animated. I remember staying late for like 2 nights and just keyframing this entire thing. And then he was like, okay, cool. I was like, I'll put it in. And then the idea was it was going to be used at this moment where you had the block, and you could kind of just connect to this like counter system. So this is the first ever counter in Assassin's Creed, and it was in there and it shipped with it, and it was a fully keyframed kind of move out the way, and we wanted this moment so you'd feel like this badass assassin. it was like, I was really proud of it at the time. It was like 100% keyframe. This was before we were kind of really using mocap. But it also had to be animated at 15 frames a second because we were trying to be really conservative with how much animation, because Assassin's Creed had so much animation in it. We were just trying to be really conservative with it. So we only basically had 3 frames to kind of get you into position. Later counters kind of became 30 frames a second just to facilitate more kind of touching and contact and tactile motion. But counter kills were like a moment where you felt like the assassin. It was like a real kind of reward for quick thinking. And we always wanted to kind of reward you, and it should always be in the flow of the attack. So we kind of wanted to be all like balletic. Oh yeah, so that, and then there you go. You can kind of see how the donut works. So you would get this attack that's coming in from this one angle, and then you could just kind of move out the way of the attack, and then everything kind of came from this donut, and it's like it seemed to work for us. I don't know if it was used in any games after that, but for AC1 it worked perfectly. Okay, so now we kind of had our like recipe. We needed to find something that worked for every position on the donut, and every weapon and every foot position. So I just needed inspiration. So there was a guy that just came to Montreal, a guy called Dean Evans, like a good friend of mine, and he's like he's crazy with some of his ideas. He loved like 80s films. He had a keen eye for violence, and he had this huge loft space. So we spent a couple of evenings like kind of drinking beer and basically attacking each other in all these different kind of creative ways. So every counter in AC1 you see kind of came from this night, and all we did was we kind of danced around and blocked things out, and it was like, okay, if I'm going to hit you here, where are we going to go? And it's like, okay, well, I'm going to turn this hair, and I'm going to break your arm, and then I'm going to spin around you, and then I'm going to hit you in the face. And I was like, cool, that's awesome, write that down. And then would try and work out how we're going to animate it. So these are some of the kind of the counters that came from it as well. It was like the one at the top left, I think, is a personal favorite. It's like the whole way you kind of kick him in the nuts and then in the shoulder and then kind of bring him down. They all felt nice and fluid, and again, it was all about this whole kind of ballet of attacks. And like everything needed to be counterable as well. So you got kind of, what's that one at the bottom right? Yeah, it's the one where, that's it. It's like that. I really like the whole kind of flow of going through them and then sticking the sword through. It's kind of cool. So yeah, so here it was like, this was like a counter grab as well. And so if what was happening is if someone would grab you, you could basically just return their counter against them and then just kick them off into things. So it was really cool if they would try and grab you and then you were on a roof. You'd turn them and then just kick them off the roof and then they go flying, which is pretty awesome. So AC1 was pretty much, was much more keyframe than mocap. So I wanted to talk about how we created some of the animation, how we worked with mocap. So when we did do it. So everything was done in 3ds Max, and this is a slide I've shown many times before, and it was kind of, its origins came from AC1, and it was a technique that we kind of coined MoFrame, and it was talking about how we'd augment motion capture and how we'd basically plus everything. And it's like, I firmly believe that as good as the motion capture data was, that you couldn't just take that data and put it in, it just wouldn't work. Like for example, like the thing on the left there, it's cool motion capture, but it's just not that readable. So the thing on the right would be the move that, you know, we'd really accentuate that lines of action. We'd like pull the Yankin to the back and really kind of throw him down. And this is what we did with Splinter Cell. But that was that same technique that we used in AC1. So here you see this thing that we used to do as well, where to make things nice and readable, I used to put this little red ball on the end of the sword, and then you'd make sure that by having that red ball, if that red ball's trajectory looked nice and smooth, then you kind of knew that the animation was going to look pretty good. And then we basically go and clean up like the contacts and like foot positions and any grabs and stuff like that. But the main thing was we wanted to make sure that those moves were nice and readable because they were happening so quick. You kind of had to see them coming. and then if you saw them coming, your eye would fill in all those parts in between. So, like, you know, I don't want to go into motion capture too much with Assassin's Creed because we did do some, but we didn't do like a huge amount. You know, I remember I was in the suit with Alex, and that's something that just kind of wouldn't really happen now. It was like at the time that, like, this was when UB Montreal were kind of just early adopters on mocap. So we didn't have a stunt coordinator. It was a lot less organized in 2005 as well. It was like we literally used to turn up and then do something, get it in the can, and kind of like try and put it in the game. You know, it's like the animators were the actors, as I said. It's like any time that you get hit in Assassin's Creed, it was me in a suit. And so, you know, it's like, to me, but it was all about how you would dive into that animation, kind of into that mocap the right way. So one thing we did with Assassin's Creed, which was really kind of cool, was before we had like an AI programmer, we would just basically play the game as 2-player. So AC2 actually had like not AC2, sorry, AC1 actually had like a 2-player mode that was kind of there that we only used for testing. It wouldn't work with anything else, but it was how we would work out how the game was going to work. It was like, so we didn't have any need to wait for like AI behaviors because the best AI was another player. So we'd start to find all these ways of countering each other, and you really kind of made sure that everything was fair because the NPCs and the assassin basically had the same combat. It really kind of helped expose like any exploits that you could have on any of the NPCs, and it really kind of helped improve the feel of the combat as well. And it made sure that everything was counterable, so you kind of like dance with each other, and it was kind of cool. So I'm going to kind of finish off with like some, I want to talk about like the depth of the combat, and like the puppeteering was something that Patrice really liked, but it didn't come into combat until quite late on. You know, we started off with like, if you were to press the empty hand button, that would be the grab, or the counter grab. Then if you press the feet, that would kind of be the dodge. So when we were working all these moves, we kind of had to think of, okay, well, something has to lead with the feet first. And then we'd have like the weapon hand, that would be countering as well. And then we'd have the head. I mean, the head I really wanted to put in as like a headbutt, but we just didn't have time to do it. So we ended up having like the assassin's vision, everything, but I still would have loved to have had it as a headbutt. Would have been kind of cool. And then, yeah, we had like the high profile and the weapon select. So one of the moves that we kind of added towards the end of development was we kind of doubled down on the puppeteering concept. And if an NPC kind of attempted a strong attack and you managed to block it and counter it, then you would get this moment where you could effectively create your own finisher. So you could kind of, if you press foot, you would stamp on that foot. I think it was, yeah. Oh, there you go. So if you press like the weapon hand, you would finish them like that. And then if you press foot, you would end up just like breaking their leg. Bam! And it was like, you just do that. And then that used to make me, I used to hate that because it's like I had this fear about snapping my knee, but it was really cool. So, you know, it's like, so let's see. So let's go, I've been told I've only got like a couple of minutes, so I'm going to kind of skip through it. So we had this thing called the staging system. And let's see if there's the sound on this. Anyway, so there was this scene that really kind of highlighted it from Jack Reacher. And he used to talk about how he was going to deal with multiple opponents. And, you know, he always used to say, like in this scene, he kind of talks about like I think one guy goes, yeah, there's 5 of us, there's 1 of you, yeah, clearly we're going to beat you up. And then like Tom Cruise, I think, says, it's like, no, it's not really, it's like, it's basically 2-on-1 because one of you is going to attack me, I'm going to break your arm, and da-da-da-da. But it was this whole idea of the fight science. So I really like this idea of being smart and seeing combat in different ways that you could actually kind of manipulate that if you spotted it. And this came from this obsession I had with this moment in Indiana Jones, where, you know, it was that famous kind of gun versus sword scene where you want to feel smart in combat. So, and we kind of needed it to fill holes in the AI because we just didn't have any at the time. So we get like things like, let's see, they're coming up. So then, they do these kind of little tells, like, okay, well, let's fight, and they just kind of like, they call you out and they try and say something. And then we had these other moments where they'd be scared because they'd see the assassin do something really badass and they kind of run away. So we had all these little things where you'd have like NPCs like throwing up, and they'd be like, they'd see something like they see this amazing combat move, and they'd be like, yeah, and they'd throw up and then just kind of run away. And then we really wanted this idea of you could be so good at your combat that you didn't actually need to use the combat, so it kind of negated what my job was. But you know, so it added this kind of light reputation as well, which was really nice. So we felt like this gave this hidden layer to Assassin's Creed, which I don't think anyone ever noticed, but I was really proud of. So let's see. So yeah, the hidden blade is something that I think is kind of interesting because it nearly didn't happen in combat. Originally, it was only going to be seen for these moments where you assassinate one of the main kind of 12 assassinations. But that meant that you only saw it for this really tiny amount of time, for like 3 frames, and it was like tiny on the screen. So I went and added a hidden blade combat system without asking. And then I just kind of went to mocap and then put it in the game, and then no one told me that I couldn't, because I didn't realize what the protocol to get like motion capture in the game was. And then we got this bill that was telling us that, okay, well, you've now been charged for this. I was like, okay, well, best made it good then. So that kind of went in, but the cool thing is it went in through all the trailers. And there's a story where I didn't tell Patrice that we'd put it in the game, and Patrice was the creative director at the time. And I remember I put it in the game and then told him just before he was going to do a press interview, and then he kind of unleashed it, and then this press guy kind of lost his stuff, because I can't swear. But but it was kind of a cool moment either way. It's like, and it really made you feel like the assassin. It kind of felt like it brought that thing in a little bit more. So I also loved working on little details. So these details, like where the assassin would kind of flip out the blade and he'd point at things, they were kind of made for trailers, but it also meant that any button and anything that you did would have some sort of response. So it's kind of cool. And you'll start to see all these sort of things all over Assassin's Creed. Like, you know, like when you choose fists, you'll punch, or when you pull the blade out, you'll do some sort of kind of spin. And there were all these details that we really had to fight for, because they kind of didn't feel like they were necessary, but they added this real nice detail to the character. And that's something that kind of we tried to go through everything, and it ended up being in all the trailers, so it must have been pretty good. Yeah, things like, I love this moment where someone would fall off a roof. I want him to kind of just like scream and whatever, but let's see. So final thoughts, bam, 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 bam. There you go, skip to the end. So it laid the foundations for AC. It was kind of cool. We were given like huge amount of ownership over everything. We worked with mocap data for the first time. We learned a bunch of stuff, and they improved on everything with AC2. It's like, I think we should have brought AI in a lot sooner. And to me, it was like, this was something where I had to play the game a lot and communicate with everything. So this is kind of where I learned how important it was to play your actual game, instead of just kind of put all the animation in. So yeah, that's the end, I suppose. If you're more interested in stuff, I have a bunch of stuff on like a YouTube channel. If you want to contact me and ask any questions about stuff, then I'm more than happy to talk about it. And anyway, thank you very much.